Hey you, I'm Andy Powell. Welcome to the Allcast Podcast. No topic is off the table. I hope you enjoy. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I'm hearing it. Seeing it.
Sounds good to me. So we'll just do it like this and then adjust it however we have to.
Sure.
So, Marc Nelson, at last. We've been planning this since we met, I think.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it has. So so yesterday we got to go see Nefarious, which is a movie in theaters about demonic possession. And that was pretty interesting. It blew my mind. What did you think of it?
Not my thing, in that I don't like movies like that, but what was amazing to me was the fact that the lead actor, the prisoner, did such an amazing job of being possessed and then having the host body who had no clue what was really going on. And it was quite obvious to me that this stuff happens because I know it happens. So it was just seeing it like that made it so real.
Yeah, he did an incredible job. I was really impressed to have to sit there and read a script like that and put yourself in the mindset of basically being a demon. And I mean, it's got to be a lot of interesting time spent with yourself studying those lines.
Well, and his facial features were so appropriate, when he was switching between the characters. And the tics and the way he would talk and the language changes and the little boy and all these different things that came out was unbelievable. I mean, it was really a good job.
Yeah, he was fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, I remember you mentioned that horror movies aren't your thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so you've had an experience with like a near-death experience.
Yep.
And would you mind talking about that?
Sure. Ask away.
So what happened? You mentioned yesterday, you're like, oh, some of you guys know I died a few times last year.
Yeah. So I got COVID real bad. And it's an amazing set of circumstances, when you think about this. We rented an Airbnb in Pueblo, Colorado. And as we were turning onto the street where the Airbnb was, I saw a helicopter, a yellow one, on top of a roof of a building. And, oh, well, look at that. There is a hospital right there. And Laura, my wife, says, and we're not using it, because we tend to have a habit of using hospitals. But it was about 500 yards away. And I said it was a good par 5. That's how long the distance was. But what was interesting is I got COVID. I was having like malaria symptoms. Which I've had before in Africa, so I know what malaria is like. And went to the hospital the first time. They discharged me because they missed the pneumonias. And when I told them, I said, look, my blood's the wrong color. And they said, but you have no secondary, so we're going to use the CDC protocol and discharge you.
No secondary what?
Infections.
Oh.
So they missed the pneumonias. Had they seen the pneumonias, they would have kept me in. But they discharged me. And let me jump ahead on that just a little bit, because when I found out in, I think it was September of last year, this happened January of 21, September of 21, that they had missed the pneumonias, and I left the pulmonologist's office, I got mad for seconds. And the first thing going through my mind is, I got to get my lawyer buddy on this because they misdiagnosed and look what happened to me. And then I went, no, wait a minute. Had I gone in earlier, would I have had the same experiences that I had when I went in 4 days later? And I went, no, I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything in the world. And so I never took the tag off, the hospital label, never took it off. Went back to the Airbnb, and things just deteriorated. And it was, and the horror movie thing that we talked about just in the beginning of this. So I would try to go to sleep, and on the inside of my eyelids were movies playing, and it would start the countdown. Remember the old driving movies would be like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the movie would start. Mm-hmm. It was inside my eyelids, and it was horror movies. I mean, it was stuff that you couldn't even make up, but it would keep me awake. And I didn't realize what was going on at the time, but it kept me awake.
This had never happened to you before getting COVID?
Not like this, no. I mean, yeah, from the stuff that happened in Africa when I was growing up, I used to have nightmares and stuff, but this was ongoing, continuous. It was like I was being attacked, but it kept me awake, and I hadn't yet connected the dots. And then so after a few days of this, and I think it was a couple of days, maybe 3 of this, the tone of these movies started to change. They became more peaceful. Then I had this experience, was like a dream, and it was petrifying, more scary than all the other stuff, where I was actually looking into this vortex. Maybe I was in this vortex, peering down into hell. And I was watching people going down, and the shape and their form transferring into mutation-type things. And down on the bottom, I was looking at this fire, and I could hear all this pain and the sorrow and everything. And it's very hard. I can see it so clearly, but it's so hard to describe. And I woke up and called my wife and said, "What's all this?" And I was petrified, and she had nothing to say about it. That was the third last clear memory I have. So then I went to sleep again, and I had the next dream that I remember was 4 palm trees walking down a lawn on a pathway towards a beach. And there were these indigo-colored lights wrapped around the tree trunks from the root ball all the way up to the top, and the lights were lit up. And there was this feeling of peace and comfort and all this other stuff that is like a happy place that you would go to, right? Mm-hmm. And woke up and called my wife and said, "What do you think about this?" And she said, "Well, indigo is high up on the spectrum of healing in the healing world. It's a very important, strong healing light, that color." That's my words. Her words were much more definitive than that. And okay, then I went back down again, and I experienced this like I was in a cocoon. Again, it's so vivid, but it's so hard to describe, yet it's so simple. The light, the colors of the light, the warmth, the glow, the peace, the serenity. And at the end of this cocoon was a vision of a face. Now, I don't know if that face was Jesus or God or an angel. I can't tell you which, but there was this face. And I don't know, I have no idea, no timeline on any of this. But I woke up and called my wife and said to her, in that backpack, in that closet over there, there's my church backpack, which is from Starting Point. It's the one I take to church every Sunday. And in that backpack, there's a pulse oximeter. Get it out. Now, we had not been able to find a pulse oximeter the entire time that I'd been sick, which was at this point almost 3 weeks. And it was on back order, and we had some deliveries coming in a few days later. Now, I had been delirious for days. I had been having these dreams and nightmares and things for days. And I sit up here and I'm perfectly clear. I'm now issuing instructions as if I was barking out orders. Totally cognizant of everything going on around me. So get the pulse oximeter. So put it on your finger. She puts on her finger, she gets her reading. So put it on my finger, mine's 72%. Yeah.
That's extremely low.
Well, that's dying low.
Yeah.
Right. So I give it back to her saying, well, there must be a mistake. Try it again. So she does it again, hands it back to me. Now I'm doing the crazy thing, trying every finger, right? Switching it on and off and putting it on backwards and do this and do that, trying to see if I can get, a different reading. And it's all consistent. And so I called the doctor and said, this is what it is. He says, you need to be in the hospital. Hung up the phone and said to my wife, okay, we have 2 choices. I've got 15 minutes here. That's it. It's 15 minutes, one-time shot. Either we call 911, get the ambulance, was snowing outside, or we just get in a truck and go, because the hospital was 500 yards away. I got up, got a Ziploc baggie, put my wallet, my charger for my phone, 2 cables, headset, my phone, and got dressed. Not necessarily in that order, but got dressed. Got into the vehicle, and we drove to the hospital. Don't remember much once we got there. I remember her running inside, and the next thing I remember, she told me I just fell, when they came to get me out of the vehicle, I just fell out into their arms. And I remember waking up because they put me on oxygen. I started responding to oxygen almost immediately. But the thing that was quite amazing, when I was getting dressed, I noticed that I was purple from the middle of my rib cage down to my feet. It was the same blotted, purpley blue color. My arms, my hands, same thing. That my mom had when she was dying, probably the last half hour of her life. I was that color.
Well, what did she die from?
Well, she had dementia, so it was finally the shutdown of all the critical functions.
Because of lack of oxygen?
Yes, she was dying. Her brain had started. Her brain. The thing about her is her heart was so strong, it just didn't give up, even though she had been pretty much dead for 3 days. And so, I'm looking at this going, well, this is what my mom looked like, and so apparently having the hospital admission tag gave them full access to the file from 4 days previously. I remember waking up in this room that, it's the big boy room. It's the room that if they can't keep you alive in that room, you're not going to stay alive. I mean, there's everything in there. And I remember them taking my blood, and my blood was chocolate brown.
Why would that be?
I had sepsis.
Oh, wow.
Right. I didn't know I had sepsis, but that's...
Yeah. So do you know where you had sepsis from?
Through my whole body. So here's what they found when I went in. I had sepsis. I had blood clots in both my shoulders. My brachial veins were 100% occluded. I had blood clots in my left leg below the knee. And these are not talking like little clots. These things like inches long. I had double pneumonia. I had acute kidney failure and multiple organ failure. And somehow I stayed alive. And I know why. I know what happened before we went to hospital. I died and came back, and enough to get to the hospital. And during that time in the hospital, there were times where I woke up and I said, what? I was sleeping in crash carts. And they said, no, you stopped breathing again. And during that period of time, and again, timelines don't mean anything. My vision went blurry because basically I was blind. Couldn't see out of either eye properly. It was just fuzzy. So I was using my camera to zoom in with the camera lens on the board, see who my doctors were that day, because I couldn't see their faces. And, ultimately my vision cleared up. But during that entire period of time, I felt I was floating on 12 inches of this most amazing golden light. I was tingling from toe to the top of my head. It was just tingling. And during this entire time when they were treating me, I never felt like I was fighting for my life, ever, not once. Apparently I was having discussions with people that I have no recollection of having. And I don't know how we did it because I had a mask on, forcing oxygen into me. But I was apparently having discussions. And, sometimes they were quite clear and other times they were not. But people were calling me all the time and talking to me on that phone. At some point, they say I died. Well, I was told I died 3 times. Once.
Is this through the heart rate monitor that they're seeing that you died? Or
no, that's what the doctor said. And I have 11 doctors now, and not every single one of these 11 doctors that I've seen since then have said there's no reason I should have survived this. They have no idea how I could have survived this. And I know how. That just wasn't my time. I have something to do yet.
You know what that is?
I'm trying to figure it out still. It's not 100% clear, but something that's interesting is I get woken up at night. I need you to pray for this person. I'll leave the name out because there's somebody at the church. And I'm going, why? Because just they're in a bad place. Pray for protection. Just pray for protection. So that's what I did for a couple of hours.
So you'll wake up in the middle of the night with a clear message of...
Just pray for this person by name.
Mm-hmm.
And did so. And then that was a Saturday. And at noon, so this was probably about 12:30 a.m., at noon, I called this person and said, you okay? He said, yeah, I was in a really, really bad place last night. And I'm going, okay, and how you now? He said, I'm great, but I was contemplating suicide. And he said, I just felt something. I felt something. I mean, there's other occasions where people have walked by me, another member of the church, in fact, that there were three ladies, and they walked by. I know of them. I've never really met them, to know that they were friends or anything about them. And out of my mouth comes, how you doing? Are you feeling better? Are you finally healed up? And this lady in the middle stops, comes over to me and said, I had exactly the same thing happen to me that happened to you. How did you know? I had no idea.
And she had heard your story before?
She had heard my story.
Okay.
Because I gave some testimony probably in May or June of last year about what had happened. And she had heard the testimony, but I had no idea that she had had exactly the same thing happen. And yet we could, out of this crowd of people in the church, I just made that statement, which was not me, obviously, because, it was me, it was my voice, but how did we know? And she was struggling from the PTSD effect of being in ICU. And so she then said, we're brothers and sisters in this. And that's how we've been ever since. So that had happened, and then this thing with this guy with the suicide. So that afternoon I was at church, Saturday service, and we were done with the prayer meeting, and the two pastors, I said, we need to have a talk. What's going on here? Why is this kind of stuff happening? And they said much the same as the rabbis that I talked to had said, from New York, that it wasn't my time, but two, there is a purpose yet to be determined. But that I have in my heart today what every pastor wishes they had. That, okay, I can't quote chapter and verse from the Bible, but whatever I say is coming from the heart in this. And that's a gift that I've been given. And I'm still trying to figure that out.
So that's a gift that you received during those times of
Mm-hmm.
COVID when you died.
Mm-hmm.
And then had those near-death experiences where you saw into the vortex toward hell and then into heaven, and then came back with that.
And then also the fact that, then I had the vision in the cocoon, What's interesting is I saw the cardiologist. Oh, goodness, let's see. So with all of that stuff, by May, May of 21, all the blood clots were gone. They kept doing every few weeks, they kept doing the Doppler ultrasounds looking for the blood clots, and they said there was no evidence or pathology of the blood clots in my veins. And I had DVTs, which is the deep vein thrombosis type of clots.
How long after was that?
This was May, June, July, August. They were doing them because my blood was so thick, and they kept taking labs. Every time they took labs, my veins would collapse. So then the doctors think, oh, he's got clots again, and they would shoot me off to the hospital. And I mean, there were times I was in the hospital 3 times in a week.
So it's from January to May?
Yeah, January to May, June.
5 months later, there's no evidence.
There's no, and the last time that I had it, I said, so she said, there's no clots. And I'm going, well, is there anything? She says, there's no evidence of any pathology of clots. And I said, but these clots were supposedly inches long. She said, I'm telling you, there's nothing. Watch, I'll show you.
And pathology would be like a signature of what had
Yeah,
taken
like
place.
residue. She said the pipes are clean.
Wow.
And then she went and showed my arteries, showed me the arteries too. And I was like, there was nothing there. And there was just nothing there. But I had so many, supposedly. I said the brachial veins, I mean, they could not get blood out of me. It was my veins collapsed. There were so many clots. They were digging all over my arms trying to get blood. Finally, when they did, they left. They had specific ports for medications and IVs, and specific ports for draws, blood draws. And my arms, when I came out of the hospital, they were black and blue from everywhere.
Yeah.
Just from them trying to get needles in and get blood.
Ouch.
Yeah. And so it was interesting because this hospital was a religious hospital. It was run by Jehovah's Witnesses, but it was a Catholic hospital. No, sorry, not Jehovah's Witnesses. Sometimes they get confused. Seventh-day Adventists.
Oh.
It was an Adventist hospital, but it was a Catholic hospital because it was a Catholic priest. And that was an interesting experience when he came in.
This is like the hospital chaplain?
Yeah, hospital chaplain, right. And what they were doing is they were pretty much using a hybrid protocol. They were not using CDC guidelines. They were using a combination of CDC and frontline doctors.
Well, it's probably best we don't follow the CDC guidelines at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Because if they'd done the CDC guidelines, I would not be having this little discussion. And because they used FDA off-label, and naturopathic means for all of the cocktails they were mixing up. That included hydroxychloroquine, that included ivermectin, that included remdesivir. It was all those things, but it was a cocktail that was built for me.
And they were all using that at the time?
Yeah.
That's excellent.
It's a cocktail they were built for me. I remember the one day I took a picture. I was looking up and took a picture of all the bags on the IV stand, probably 25 bags up there. All funneling down into a pump that mixed everything. And what they would do is they would give me the meds, would start about 9 p.m. at night, and 3:30 in the morning they'd start taking labs. And then by 11 o'clock they would come in and they would say, okay, so this is how I find out about the sepsis. Okay, your sepsis is 50% better today. I said, I had sepsis? But I had sepsis for a while.
So sepsis, my understanding of it is when there's some sort of wall between your intestinal tract and your blood flow that collapses.
My blood was full of sepsis, and what happens is when
sepsis though is when you say it's full of sepsis, that's like your fecal matter and things that are going to be like processed, your food that's being processed, right? Is that what that is?
Well, so my understanding of sepsis in this case, and I could be wrong, is that's when the body turns on itself. The body kills itself. It was in my bloodstream. And so it was going through all of my organs, anywhere where the blood would flow. Yeah. And hence the acute kidney failure, hence the multiple organ failure. Which, by the way, my kidney functions are perfectly normal today. I just had a whole bunch of labs done. My kidney functions, my doctor says, better than most people. So it's just something was at work there. And those doctors, using these protocols, and during that entire period of time, as I said, I never felt like I was fighting for my life, ever, during this process.
You probably were so sick that you kind of had tuned out.
I had made my deal with God. My deal was, if I'm going to die, do it now, because I do not want my grandbaby that was yet to come to be born the day I died. That was my deal.
And your grandbaby was almost due.
And my grandbaby was due, not almost due.
That day?
Due. No, it was due. Baby, it's the first pregnancy. It was, how that goes with kids. It's like 2 weeks either way of the due date. She ended up being late. And here's something else that was kind of interesting. They talk about coincidences. There's no coincidences. We never told my daughter how sick I actually was because we didn't want to induce something. And her and I got COVID at the same time. We found that out after the baby was born. So I talked to her at some point, a few days before maybe a week before the end of January. I'm not sure exactly because my timeline's all messed up. I don't have a timeline. My timeline doesn't exist. It was God's timeline I was living on because it didn't matter. I had no clue what time of day it was. And even though I was wearing no, I was wearing my watch. They took the watch off, but I had the watch there, and I had the phone. And the phone was plugged in, but it didn't matter. I wasn't looking at the time. And I talked to her, and I said, so how's the baby? My daughter said, the baby will come when you're home safe. So I get discharged, when it was okay for the discharge. And that was Friday, the 29th.
Of January? I
think it was the 29th of January. No, that was a Saturday. So it was Saturday. So it's the 30th.
So how many days are you
No,
there?
Wait. You see, this is the point. My mind is still a little scrambled. Point is I get home the next morning. I call her, said, okay, I'm home safe. And that was Saturday morning. And the baby, at about noon. And the baby was born 4 a.m. Sunday morning.
Oh, wow.
Perfectly healthy. However, when the midwife was clearing up all the stuff, she asked my daughter, did you have COVID recently? And she said, yes, but I'm clear now. And so she showed my daughter where the umbilical cord had been attacked by the COVID, and where the sac that the baby was born in, that is carried in, had been attacked by the COVID. You could see indentations and where COVID had gone after it. And the midwife said that they're seeing a lot of this. They're seeing a lot of late-term pregnancies being terminated because COVID attacks the fetus. And I've heard the same thing. And she made a statement about, had she been 7 or 8 months pregnant, not that close to due date, that baby would have died.
Because it would have had more time to
the COVID would have had more time because, I know some people that were 7 months pregnant, not just one group of people, but were 7 months pregnant and all stillborns. Because they got COVID, and within 6 weeks, the babies were gone.
That's terrible.
Yeah, that's terrible. That's spiritual warfare.
Yeah. And so how long were you in the hospital during the month of January? More than a couple weeks?
2 weeks. And the way I healed was miraculous. My last visit to the cardiologist in 21 was actually in May of 21. He said, you're good to go, man. I'll see you in a year unless something changes. Which, when you consider I had all these heart attacks and I have no tissue damage. There's no tissue damage from all these heart attacks. And when last week I was with a cardiologist for my 1 year follow-up, and they now they have all the records from all the stuff. And she said, how many heart attacks do you think you had? I said, I think about 3. I remember 2 of them. She said, oh no, you had way more than that with your hypoxia, which is no oxygen in your blood. She said you had multiple heart attacks. Small ones, but lots, but there's no tissue damage at all.
That's amazing.
Make that one up. I don't get it. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it.
Right.
Yeah, and every doctor I've seen has said there's no reason you should be alive today.
Well, I'm glad you are.
Yeah, I am too. I got to see my grandbaby I never thought I was going to see.
Yeah.
Because I made that deal,
Wow.
And the deal was take me.
So
Give her a life.
Prior to having this near-death experience, what was your stance on spiritual gifts?
Never really understood it. You see, so let's go back to when I was a kid, all right? I grew up in Africa, and my experience with Sunday school and church was out of the Church of England or the Anglican Church, and for the most part. And we had pastors that did an awfully good job of scaring the living you-know-what out of little kids. And so my way of getting even with them was kind of funny. I was so scared by what we were being taught in Sunday school. Before the end of every service, they would have all the kids come up that had a birthday that week. I went up every week. That was just my way of getting back at them. You're scaring me. I'm going to get back at you in some way, shape, or form.
So they were scaring you in the sense that this is what the Bible says, and it's scary. And if
well,
you
they
don't
never
do this,
gave us the whole story.
What
it was the fire, hell. It was the fire and brimstone and hell, and then you got to earn your way in. If you don't earn your way in, all the other good stuff in between, they never talked about. They never talked about it.
So they're not telling pretty much the most important parts.
They're not. Well, guess what? Most of our churches are doing that.
Yeah.
They're not. They leave the middle out.
Yeah.
And that's where everything happens, is in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I could, I left those churches when I was, I don't know, 10 years old or something. I was invited to a Billy Graham crusade. I want to think it was maybe 73. I don't remember the dates. And I got born again. And it was cool. It was a wonderful week. It was a camp. It was a youth camp. And I went. The people that invited me I forget. I think they were Presbyterian church. So I started going to church, and I'm looking around, going, "No, they're a bunch of hypocrites. They're not doing what Billy Graham said. They're not doing it. This is all about their definition of your relationship with God." And so I walked away from the church. I was done. And then today I know what the gifts are, because I can tell you how many times now that God stepped in. But it was always me saying, "Oh, God, help me, get me out of this mess." Or, we've all done it, whether it was combat, whether it was whatever stupid stuff you were doing. We've all said, "Oh, God, oh, God." And it was all conditional about, get me out, save me. And never really thought that he was actually doing that. And when he was. I didn't realize that until June of 2020. And I went back to the church because I met JT, our pastor. I needed a pastor for my mom had died from sepsis. No, I'm sorry, from
Dementia.
Dementia, right. You see, I still have a little bit of that brain fog. And
so how long were you out of the church? You said you left
13 to 20, so that would be 40 years. More than that.
So,
more than that.
Most of your life you've been...
Yeah, well, so I was 13, I'm 62, so there you have it. 13 or 14, I'm 62. So I was on a very, very, very short bus. Took me a long time to catch up. And but it was interesting. So I went to see JT because a friend of ours went to Starting Point Church. And I said, he said, "Well, ask me the question." I told him exactly what I just said. Churches scared me. I just didn't see the message. And he said to me, he said, "Your relationship with God is yours and no one gets to define it." And I'm going, okay. And now I'm interested in this because this is a church that meets in a coffee shop. Was it a coffee shop that's in a church? Now I was intrigued. I was interested. And started going to the men's discovery groups. And that's where I learned, if you want to take a walk with God, join one of these small groups, these discovery groups, because you can walk down this path. It's so easy to do if you just open yourself up to it.
Yeah.
And so then in June of 2020, when all that Antifa stuff was happening and they're painting swastikas and hammer and sickles on buildings and burning stuff down, I just flipped. I went totally berserk. I had done a very good job. First time I was shot at, I was 12. I'd done a very, very good job of putting all the things that had happened between 12 and roughly 22 in boxes.
Which was your time in the Rhodesian army?
Well, I wasn't in the Rhodesian army for that long. I mean, but yes, there was that, and when I got out, the stuff I was doing after the fact. Mm-hmm. And some of the stuff we did before I just said, I went to commanding officer, I'm not doing this. I got time left on this contract, but I'm not going to do it. And we can talk about that. But what was interesting is I had done a really good job of putting all these things in these little boxes, and every once in a while one of them would jump out, and I'd call it my Jack in the Box. And I could deal with it because it was one at a time. Mm-hmm. Well, in 2020... June of 2020, with all this stuff going on, it's just like now you talk about spiritual warfare. Now you talk about gifts that term you used earlier.
Spiritual gifts.
Spiritual gifts, and all of those boxes popped open at the same time. So I go into my garage. I put on rock and roll. I'm halfway into a bottle of tequila. I had consumed half a bottle of tequila, and I got a gun. And I had no intention of committing suicide. I was so paranoid that we were going to get attacked. Yep. I reverted all the way back to everything.
Yep.
that I put in, and all these boxes are open, and I'm just doing this, and I realized at that point that the Jack in the Box was not Jack, it was the devil, and the devil was in each one of these little boxes, and just disguised as Jack in the Box.
Yeah.
And that was a spiritual warfare, and because I was getting so close to the church at that point,
the torment started.
I was going through a spiritual war, and that night was the night that was either going to be I go with him or I go with God. And what was interesting is I have to give this up to God. He gave me the strength to forgive myself. And once I forgave myself, all of this stuff went away. It just went away. Because once I could forgive myself, I then realized that even I could be redeemed. With all the stupid stuff I'd done.
Well, like you said about it takes works to get into heaven earlier, which is not true.
No, it's not.
It's not that you could be redeemed. It's that you've already been redeemed and that you've already been forgiven. So then with that blockage for yourself, it's like, okay, well, give yourself some grace now.
Yeah.
And
I've never had this much peace in my life.
And have that gift received.
Yeah. And since that night in that garage, I've never had that much peace in my life. Ever.
Wow.
It's amazing. And that's when I started thinking, my goodness, I'm alive because of this. All this thing that I did, well, yeah, that was God. Well, that was God. And, now I recognize it as that spiritual gift. But not at the time it was happening. Because it was all me invoking his name. Oh, God, get me out of this.
Right.
It was like, it was conditional. Get me out of this and I'll go to church. But I never went to church type thing.
Exactly. Call on him when you need it most instead of all the time when you don't.
Yep. Yeah, but he was always there.
Mm-hmm.
Always there. So, at that point then, I asked JT... May 16th of 2021, I got baptized. And not knowing that my wife was going to join me in the tank, that was a total surprise, which was cool. So now it was complete. Now I was what I believe to be home. And I gave some testimony about that night in the garage and some things that had happened, in front of the entire church. And the last part of that testimony, one was thanking my wife for being there for me when I came here with $1,000 in a suitcase and a broken man, drinking like an alcoholic. And the last thing I said was, there's a song by Maverick City, and in the chorus line it says, the devil lost another one. Well, he lost another one. And then I asked the whole congregation to recite what's on our wall. Starting Point Church.
Yeah.
That slogan that we have, and it ends with anything's possible.
Yeah, everybody's welcome. What's the first one?
Oh, goodness. Well, everybody's welcome. I forget now, but the last part is anything's possible. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was focusing on, is anything is possible. And I said, if I can be redeemed, then everybody can be redeemed.
Yeah. Yep.
And, then this thing with COVID hit, right? A year later, basically. Well, not a year later.
Well, that was just starting to get into it. It was June of 2020.
Well, so I got COVID in February of 2020 before they even knew what it was. And, once they started trying to figure out COVID, that my doctor intentionally kept me out of the hospital, saying, we put you in a hospital, they'll kill you. They'll put you on a respirator, and you'll never get off a respirator.
Yeah. And then 2021 was when you had all that other stuff happen with the sepsis and the organ failure.
No. So 2021 is when I wrecked my leg and had, multiple surgeries. It was 2022 where I had the COVID. Last year. Right. We're talking a year ago.
I forgot what year it is.
I know. I mean, so much has happened. So think about this. How much has happened since time I started going to discovery groups in 2019 to today?
The amount of...
just how much intervention has been on my behalf. How blessed my family is.
Mm-hmm. the level of attack on your body and your
Yeah, I mean, the war that was there, but I never felt like I was fighting a war. I never, like I said, I never felt I was in fear for my life or fighting for my life. That part was done in the garage in 2020.
Yeah.
It was done. And there's a lot of things that I did that now I can talk about where before I could never talk about them.
Like
So, that's another book.
Right on.
That's a book.
So when did you come to the United States? You said you grew up in
1982.
1982, and the Billy Graham thing was in the early 70s in
Yeah, I
Africa?
want to say 73 or thereabouts.
That was in Africa then.
That was in Africa.
Right
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to when you first came to the States?
Laguna Beach, California.
How long were you there?
So we lived in Orange County from 1982 until, well, it depends if you consider my commuting, but officially moved to Arizona in 2004. That's when we moved the kid out because we didn't want to raise kids in that mess down there.
Yeah.
And then I commuted from 2004 up until COVID hit in 2020. And that's when I got to spend so much time here. And really, for the first time, I mean, we'd had this home that we had built, in 2003, and I'd never lived in it. I was just there as my wife and my son lived there, and the other foster kids lived there, but I was never living in that house until 2020.
You were going back and forth to
I was
California?
going back and forth, so I would spend X number of weeks there, a few weeks here, and go back. I wasn't doing it on a weekly basis. That would have been destructive as could be.
So you're just settling into your new home.
Yeah, I was just settling into my new home, and all this stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
And so, when I got here, I was broken. Very, very broken. This is hard to talk about. Let's just put it in the second quarter of 1980. 7 of us were removed from our unit. Think about this, we're 20 years old and change. And we're removed from our unit. We were all butter bars.
This is in the Rhodesian army?
Well, it was not the army, it was a special forces type unit. And we were sworn to contravention of the Official Secrets Act, which I said this, the other guys are looking and said, well, what does that mean? Well, if you talk about what you're doing here, you will be executed. And we're going, we didn't volunteer for this. Oh, no, it's an order. And so the 7 of us were broken up into teams. Myself and one guy were involved in stuff. 3 guys were involved in other stuff, and the other 2 guys were involved in different things. What we were responsible for doing was destroying evidence of massacres, including the pictures, the CIA involvement, not negative involvement.
When you say massacres, you mean mass murders?
Yes. The CIA involvement that was out there, but then they were not doing anything nefarious. It was kind of watching what the Russians and the Chinese were doing.
Yeah, that was before the CIA got taken over.
Yeah, before they became nefarious.
Exactly. Yeah. So
and
how did you get into this special forces unit? Is it not the
I
Army?
volunteered.
You volunteered for what?
So my mother, when my parents got divorced when I think I was 10 or so, my mother had custody of me, and she married another man. And so when I was 16 years old, they immigrated to another country, which, because I was a minor, eliminated me from having to go through national service. But I volunteered once, I was 18.
Where were you born?
I was born there, Rhodesia.
In Rhodesia.
It was actually called Southern Rhodesia at the time.
And then you moved with your mom to where?
I didn't move. I went there for school holidays and things. They moved to Malawi, which is a couple of countries north.
Oh, they moved and you stayed?
I stayed.
I
I stayed with my uncle. And then I spent school holidays between my dad or up in Malawi. It was a tobacco company, so they had aircraft that fly down and pick the kids up from school and stuff, and take them up there, flying back.
So what's the name of the entity you volunteered for when you did volunteer? It's not Army?
Support unit.
Support unit is what it's called.
Yeah, it's nondescript today. It doesn't even exist.
Okay, so it was already a special forces thing that
it was so
applied
support
for.
unit was a very interesting organization. We had a mounted troop, which was a combat mounted troop on horses. I mean, that was very intimidating if you had those guys charging down on you. It was kind of like the old cavalry days, and it was a pure intimidation tactic. Most of our work was done. There were 10 operational companies, 60 men apiece, and then the rest of it was all logistics based. And so a lot of what we were doing was it was interesting. We were also the Presidential Guard. We were also in one of our missions was civil disturbance, and then there was the combat side of it. And the combat side of it wasn't really intended to go into combat. It was more working with special branch and doing some recon stuff. Special branch was basically the equivalent of the CIA, FBI, NSA, all of them put together.
Just to understand clearly, because in the United States we have the military, and in order to get into some special operations unit, you have to first join the basic military and then apply, and then or go get selected.
We were the first intake where that was waived.
So you didn't have to join the regular military.
No, so we had all of our instructors and all of the sergeants were all combat vets. And for example, our regimental sergeant major, he started combat in Malaya in the 50s against insurgencies. And that's what we were fighting. We were fighting insurgencies. So, and I'll explain how that happened in just a second.
What was the testing like to get into this type of unit?
It's physical.
Yeah, what did you have to do?
Just enhanced versions of boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, we were running so low on manpower. And most everyone that was in that unit that was in the intake I was in all came from rural areas. We all qualified marksmen, first time at the range, because we all hunted, we all tracked, we all knew how to shoot. We all carried, when I was 12 years old, my dad gave me the keys for the gun safe. In the gun safe, we had FN, FALs, we had all sorts of stuff, because the war was starting to, heat up. At the time, I think my dad was doing 30 days in, 30 days out, and he was 50 years old. But he had some special skills. He was actually bodyguarding tribal chiefs against the communists, because they were trying to assassinate the communists. The communists were trying to assassinate the tribal chiefs to take away the structure of the tribe so that they could intimidate the tribes. When you come back to this whole thing about second quarter of 1980, there was an election coming up, and the Chinese side won. And so the minute that those election results started to become known, that's when we were brought in, and we had to start destroying stuff, because the government that was coming in, thank you, Jimmy Carter, the government that was coming in was made up of people where there was forensic evidence, photographic evidence of massacres at missions where babies were swung head first into brick walls. They held them by the feet and swung them into brick walls with heads. There were splatters, pictures of splatters of, this, and massacres of nuns and priests, and hundreds and hundreds of people. One of the missions was the Elam Mission massacre. Not only did they massacre everybody, but they abducted about 600 little kids. And, they took them up into Tanzania, which was at that point run by the Chinese, indoctrinated them, sent them back as commissars, that kind of stuff, and continued this communist insurgency, which had gone on for a long time. So we destroyed the Central Firearms Registry for civilians, because we had gun registration back then, because we had sanctions, which was put on us by the United Nations and England and America, and that, because they all thought that this was a race war, when in fact you had the Chinese on the east side of the equation, and they had the Russians on the west side of the equation. Angola was alive and well at the time. So there was a lot of, and Jimmy Carter said there's not a single communist troop in southern Africa. Well, there were 100,000 Cubans in Angola at the time. So, it was the world's perception, what the world was told, and what was actually happening were two totally different things.
Seems to be pretty commonplace these days.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to Carter Library now and you read up on this stuff, it's all being declassified, you'll see Cyrus Vance, Andrew Young, all saying they intentionally lied to Congress on this.
So there's a new government coming in, and the current government in which you served under told you, hey, you have to destroy all this evidence, and if you don't do what you say or you tell people about it, you'll be executed.
Contravention of Official Secrets Act.
You say it again?
Contravention of the Official Secrets Act. And the reason for it is they were trying to prevent a civil war, supposedly. And so the three guys in the forensic labs, they destroyed all the forensic evidence. We went through all of the personnel folders that contained special operations, people that were involved in these special operations, undercover people, both black, white, didn't matter, tribes, different tribes, because it was a tribal conflict. And so spent a few weeks just burning stuff. And the boilers were running really well. And that tweaked me when I started seeing that, you hear about things, but when you actually see it and you're destroying it, and you're destroying something because the people coming in are going to be ministers in the government, and they're implicated in these massacres.
Pretty dark.
It tweaks you. So you want to talk about spiritual warfare? There it was. Again, I didn't realize it was spiritual warfare at the time. But it tweaked me. And so I would say, I don't know how many of us, but a number of us took discharges because we had sore knees or sore shoulders or whatever. I think only one of the 7 of us stayed in, finished out his contract. So we were given a discharge. It wasn't dishonorable. We were just given a discharge because we were so tweaked mentally on this stuff. And then stupid here goes back out to where I used to live on a gold mine, which has a game park on one end of it. It's 29,500 acres of land. And my dad says, go back to town, go to the police armory, go draw a weapon. I'm going, why? I got weapons. No, you need to go get one because of the gold mine. They're hitting the gold mines. So we need, go get a weapon.
Who's they?
The side that got promised if they won, they would get everything and didn't get it. That would be the Chinese back faction.
Okay.
And so they were promised all these things. Oh, you can have the white man's woman, the white man's house, the white man this, the white. They made it. The Chinese were the ones making it a race war, just like it is going on today in this country.
Exactly.
The parallels from what I see back then, what was happening back then, are mirrored here. The only difference is they're not killing people.
Yeah.
Yet.
They're letting us
They've been doing it for decades, though.
Yeah, they're letting us destroy ourselves first from the inside.
We're destroying ourselves. To that point of the movie last night, remember, that character that was possessed was saying, well, look at it. It's in your movies. It's in your society. It's the games you play. It's the things you do. Look at the news. It's all this stuff that's going on, the spiritual war that's going on. Well, yeah, it's a lot of it's spiritual, but a lot of it's also instigated.
Yeah, and then we just take the baton and run with it.
And we take the baton and run with it. We're our own worst enemies.
Yes.
Yeah, and so for those of us that have come here, that escaped, per se, we're looking at all this stuff going on here, and we're drawing parallels because we've seen this all before. Where the pattern is the same, the methods are a little bit different.
Yeah, that woman who escaped North Korea, Yeonmi Park.
Yep.
Have you heard of her?
Mm-hmm.
I have a personal friend from Lebanon, whose parents escaped during the war, and these people who have come over here from other places are so much more excited about what America is or what it's supposed to be or was built on than the people that even live here, because they're just born into this luxury that they don't care about because it's...
Well, yeah, here's a crazy thing to that point. So I get to go back to college in 1987, right? And so I'm doing, actually it was 88, I'm studying American history. First semester, because I wanted to finish my degree out. and I had to do the prerequisites, American history. So I'm studying American history, and midway through that semester, the professor says, "Would you like to help teach this class with me?" And I'm going, okay. So I started grading. It was an essay-based class. Started grading all the essays, working with the students. We would start dialogue in the class. It was a forum class with 270 people at the start because it was a prereq. By the end of the semester, you maybe had 70 because most people couldn't write an essay, especially on American history.
Yeah. Sad.
It's very sad. And so I did that for about, 8 years, part-time, taught American history. And I wasn't born here. I just used what I learned in my high school. I think I was about 14, maybe. Yeah, I was about 14. We had a history teacher who actually worked for that special branch that I was telling you about. He retired and went into teaching. And he said to us, first day of that class, we were studying America. We didn't know that yet. But he said, okay, so which country in the world has the biggest army? So you guys are dealing with Vietnam, the withdrawal out of Vietnam, and all this kind of stuff. And, all we heard was the propaganda you didn't want to hear, right? The stuff what a joke you guys were. And which is, totally untrue. Again, it was same thing they did in Afghanistan and the same thing they did in Iraq. It's just repeating itself. And so we go through China, Russia, this, that, whatever. And he's shaking his head and says, no, it's America. We go, no, it's not America. He says, well, they have this thing called the Second Amendment. And he said, and let me tell you this, you don't ever want to back the average American citizen into a corner, start taking away his rights, because when he comes out, Japan found out how that goes. And so that's how he introduced us to American history.
That's awesome. It's cool that you guys were studying America over there in Africa.
Yeah.
And
because that's all where we wanted to go. He said, well, if you could ever go to a country, where would you all want to go? We all wanted to go to America.
If I remember right, you mentioned something about the Constitution of Rhodesia.
Yeah, I actually have an original.
And you said that original, it was all written.
If you read the preamble to that Constitution, you'll see where it came from.
Yeah, which is America.
Right. You can see the influence and even some of the same words and the intent of where it came from. And it's a one-page document. As well.
Okay.
It's not all the constitutional rights that go with it. It's the Declaration of Independence. You read that Declaration of Independence and you look at the United States Declaration of Independence and you're going to sit there and go,
Pretty comparable.
Yeah, I mean, while it's not a mirror image, it's not hard to draw the parallel where they got it from.
Yeah. Right on.
It's amazing. And that was in 1965.
When did Rhodesia become a country, or when did they write that declaration?
That was in 1965. That's why we had sanctions, because Britain was giving away its colonies, but not us. And so we declared independence, and so they turned it into a race thing.
Yeah.
Now South Africa had their apartheid thing. That's a whole other story. It became a race thing, and the Chinese and the Russians were quick to exploit it. The Chinese mostly. People talk about this whole Chinese Belt and Road initiative that, apparently Xi has started. That was going on in '67 in Central Africa. They built, the Chinese built a railroad called the Tanzam Railroad under the auspices of, we're going to give access to ports to these landlocked countries. They were moving troops and material around on that thing. They still own it to this day. You can Google it. It's not called the Tanzam Railroad anymore, but you put in Tanzam Railroad, you'll get all the history. And it was basically a modern-day Ho Chi Minh Trail, but this time it was a railroad, a physical railroad. So that's when they started their 100-year plan against the Western world. It was in the 60s. The problem is here we are. We're 60 years into the Chinese domination plan, and we don't even know it.
Most don't.
No. And they're just doing the same thing that they've done everywhere else.
No.
Just the method is a little different.
Yeah. If you look with any fervor at all, you'll find that that's exactly the case.
Yeah.
It's really obvious all the different ways that, not all, but a lot of the different ways that it's happening, mostly through social media.
TikTok.
Yep.
Classic example.
Yep.
And now you have an administration who wants to use TikTok influencers for the election. Meanwhile, TikTok is supposedly banned for government agencies to use.
Yeah.
Where's that disconnect?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the thing is so much stuff was going on back there. Kids would come to school, high school, in convoys.
What do you mean, like their own convoys? Like
Yeah.
them and their friends would drive?
Yeah, everybody would. So you had farming districts. Chikari was one of them. And, they would all leave, depart, assembly area, and depart that assembly area on the way to school. And, everyone had weapons. I mean, they were driving, the younger kids were driving, and the older kids had the weapons out the window. And they were driving civilian vehicles. They didn't have mine-protected vehicles.
This is just to protect themselves on their way to school?
Protect themselves from ambushes.
And who would typically be ambushing?
Depends which side of the country you're on. If you're on the east side, it would be more Chinese sphere of influence. If you're on the west side, it would be the Russian sphere of influence.
Wow. Caught in the middle.
Yeah, and then the farms. I mean, my dad made a great living for a few years fortifying farmhouses and the perimeters around them. Because of the gold mine, we had explosives licenses, and he was an electrician.
Nice.
So, I spent school holidays with him. My mother was never told of this stuff, otherwise she would never have allowed me to go on those holidays. But I spent school holidays riding shotgun for him on roads that had landmines in them. There was one farmhouse we were setting up, the perimeters and everything, using all sorts of different kinds of explosives. And it was interesting. We were making claymores out of plow discs, the discs that they use for tilling the fields. And, you go through these workshops of these farms that are, I don't know, pick at 60, 80, 100 years old. They got all sorts of nuts and bolts and broken bearings and all sorts of stuff. And so, you'd set that stuff in, throw concrete over it. You've got your explosive and electronic detonation, and off you go. And we'll build them into the sides of water tanks, the sides of the houses. Those were the final lines the final lines for the perimeter defending the farmhouse. Mm-hmm. Some of these farmhouses had bunkers underneath them, had auxiliary lighting, generators. So when the power got cut, they had the generators automatically came on. And I mean, this is the way people lived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's funny.
And we thought it was normal.
It's funny today what people would call those people, preppers or...
Yeah, but it's normal.
Paranoid.
And these farms got hit. We were out there.
Well, it's practical. It's normal because it's practical, and it makes sense. You have a real type of threat that exists in day to day, and right now we don't see past the screen to the threat that actually exists.
Right. I mean, on this one particular farm, we're out there doing stuff, and the next thing we hear an ambush start up. And on the neighboring farm, they'd already killed one of the farmers. So this ambush opens up, and you could hear who started the ambush. It was the communist weapon calibers going off first. And then you would hear as our guys turned the tide of the battle around, because then you would hear the reply of the 308s, of the FNs and the MAGs, the MAG-58s and that, taking over the fight. But it was interesting. We're standing there at this concrete pump house, because on the other side of this field of maize, which was bare at the time, was in that tree line, and we see this aircraft come over the tree line, and a SAM come out of the tree line, take the aircraft down. And this is, these are school kids. Mm-hmm. These kids are commuting to school.
Hey, kids are sharp and capable.
Yeah, these kids are commuting to school from these areas. And so, it was normal for us.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how normal it was until 2000. I went to South Africa for 2.5 months. I took my son, the one we adopted, back there. And we were traveling between my one aunt's house and my other aunt's house. And we're on this frontage road alongside the freeway, and the next thing, gunfight erupts on the freeway. Now, this is South Africa now. And so I get to the house we're supposed to be going to. My aunt that now lives here in PV, she gets home, and I'm saying, batten the place up. There's a gunfight going on. Can't you hear it? And she's going, no, it's just firecrackers. And that's how they rationalize normal. So you talk about these people that live in Afghanistan, Iraq, whatever they hear, they have a way of rationalizing, no, it's not AK-47 fire, which everybody who's been shot at by one of those things knows what that sounds like. It's firecrackers. So they have these ways of rationalizing that this is all normal.
Mm-hmm. So they're not quite as prepared today as they were.
No, they were. You know, when you live for it, when you live with that stuff for most of your life, your adult life, like 40, 50 years, it doesn't matter anymore. You just don't care. You know, my dad's friends, when I went back, oh gosh, what was it? It was 97, I think. It was the last time I went back to Zimbabwe. It was 97 when I buried him. I went to see one of my friends, who was also the accountant for the mine and my dad's businesses. And I said, so how's it going? And he said to me, he said, come, let me show you something. And I walked into his office, and he had all the files of his clients. And there were 3 walls like this of client files. And there was a divider on the one side. I forget which side it was. And he said, all of these are dead. This is what's left. To your point, how do you get into these units, right? To get into SLU Scouts or RLI, all these other elite units, even the support unit, you had to have had all the service requirements. It got to the point where I'm not entirely sure why they waived some of these requirements when we went in, other than I figure it's a manpower issue. Because I think it was 2006, we went to Laughlin, and there was the last prime minister, white prime minister of Rhodesia, was the keynote speaker, Ian Douglas Smith. And it was so funny, you know, we're standing there, just people that have never really known each other, but know of each other, know people that died, this, that, and everything else. So a group of us standing by the elevators, and the next thing, the elevator opens, and he's standing in the elevator, and automatically every one of us just brace up, Prime Minister. It was like nothing had changed, right?
Yeah,
and we all braced up. And he, when he delivered his speech, first thing out of his mouth when he delivered his speech, there were about 500 people there, maybe 600 people.
In Laughlin?
In Laughlin.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting location for an
well,
event
because
like this.
there's a whole bunch of them down in Phoenix. There's a few up here, but it was just an easy place to get to for the west side. It was an organization called Rhodesians Worldwide, and this was just one of the chapters.
I see. Okay, that makes more sense.
Right. It was just, and they have Rhodesians Worldwide in Australia, and they have them all the different England and stuff like that.
Worldwide.
Yeah. Right. And so he started his keynote speech with, I'm going to mess this up, but this is the gist of it. I trust that you have become as good a citizen of your adopted country as you were of ours. That's how he started it. And so he took some questions afterwards, and one of the guys in the audience stood up and said, I don't understand what we had him beat. Why did you hand over? And he said, addressed the room, largest, said, I need everybody to stand up between that was born between 1955 and 1962. 7 years. Okay? There were 3 of us that stood up. He said, we lost that generation. That's why.
Wow. So when you were discharged and you were required not to say anything, otherwise you'd be executed, where did you go after that? What did you do? And
I spent...
You're obviously not afraid of that execution now because you're telling the story.
No, well, it's also 40 years ago. So I highly doubt that they're going to come over here and try to do something about it today. So after that, when I got discharged, as I said, I went back out to the mine, and I got told to go back to the police station, go to the armory, and check out a weapon, draw a weapon. So I did. So while I was there, the armorer says, okay, what unit? And our call sign was 151. And so I said 151, and didn't get much further. And this guy steps out, says, can I talk to you? You're in 151, which was support unit. I said, sure. So he said to me, not knowing what we had done in the prior weeks, he said to me, how would you like to get involved in the interdiction of precious metals, precious stones, ivory, that kind of stuff? I said, well, sign me up. Because I was so pissed off at the world. Mm-hmm. It was the worst mistake I ever made. And so from that point on, I was working on poaching and precious metals, precious stones, mainly emeralds, smuggling.
are you intervening with poachers, or are you poaching?
No, we were stopping them.
Stopping them, and then same story with the precious metals and stones. You're stopping people that are mining that stuff.
No, stealing it.
Stopping people that are stealing it. Okay.
Yeah, so the poachers are poaching, and the people stealing the metals and stones.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all, it was basically a way of converting what you got into American dollars. I mean, their dollar was still pretty strong. It was two US dollars to one of ours at that time. But, it was also a case of, well, that dollar's not worth anything on the international market, or wouldn't be. So, and the country was in pretty much chaos. The new government, the United States alone, gave the new government $1 billion back then. $1 billion was a lot of money back then.
Still is today, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, it's more money than I got.
Yeah.
I'd like the interest.
Yeah.
And so these guys, they just wasted all this money. But anyway, so what you had is, because they call them freedom fighters, they were terrorists. Not even insurgents, they were terrorists. And the promises that were made to them by their commissars about, you can have this house and you can have the car and you can have this and you can take the money, never materialized. So what do you think they did next? They already got all the guns.
Took it.
Yeah, so they figured, well, let's go take it. And so that's what we were fighting. And back then, poaching, gold theft, things like that, carried a 20-year sentence. There's no talking about it. When you went to jail there, you went to jail. It wasn't like here where you get this reduced and that reduced. I mean, if you were convicted of murder, they hung you within 6 weeks of that conviction. So I mean, crime was they enforced the law. So if you can imagine that, here you catch a whole bunch of guys with pick anything that was illegal, be it ivory or emeralds or whatever, and they got all the weapons. It's a shooting match. It's not something that, so you end up having a shoot-on-sight authority. You just shoot them. They shoot at you. I mean, so someone's going to survive that encounter, and there were many of those. But it got to a point, because I always was accompanied by a sworn police officer. So there were powers of arrest. But I had no real legal authority.
Yeah.
I was working undercover. The gold mine was a perfect front. And so the only people that really know what happened, that I talked to about what happened when I was still in the service, and the rest of it, was my father, my stepfather, my eldest uncle on my mother's side, because he was 3 IC of the police department in the country.
3 IC?
Yeah, third in command.
Oh.
He was the number 3 guy in the entire police force nationally. And my uncle in England, who, and this part I got to leave out because there's still stuff there, but he had left in 1965 as a spy. A Rhodesian spy, sanctions busting. His father, as I recall, got both the Croix de Guerrero and the Victoria Cross, because he went fighting in the French underground. He helped set up the underground as a spy, an English spy, Second World War. He spent the entire duration of the Second World War in the French underground. And then when he was done with that, he was sent out to, I think he was chief of station for the Southern Hemisphere or something like that. I mean, he was way up that military intelligence level.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, and they were world-class spies, and that's what my uncle did. He became a spy, and turned that into a business, where he did the things that the FBI, the Surete, the CIA couldn't do. And all of his operatives were retired British SAS officers.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, he knew what was going on. And so, a lot of what was happening during and after, my family never had any idea of. And so when I took that discharge, they thought I dishonored the family name, especially given the fact that my uncle was 3IC, all these different things, right?
Oh, man.
Oh yeah, so I was the black sheep. It was interesting because it came up because I had some entanglements, and this is something that you won't see much of. There is some reference to it on the internet, but it's less and less now. So there was a North Korean outfit called the 5th Brigade that Mugabe, who was the president at the time, brought in. He brought him in around, well, they say 1982, 83. That was BS. Because we were encountering them in 1980, 81. And their sole purpose was to massacre other tribes. Genocide.
Why? Just to destroy the structure of the area?
No opposition in elections.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And during that election that happened in well, it's interesting. We had an election in 1978, and a man by the name of Bishop Abel Muzorewa was elected. Okay, black dude. That wasn't good enough for the Russians and Chinese because he was Western oriented. He was not a Marxist or communist. So they being on the Security Council refused to ratify the election, and so they were able to force another election. But this time, all the terrorists were allowed into the country, whereas before they weren't. They said, "Oh, it's not free and fair because freedom fighters weren't allowed in." Well, the UN comes in as a peacekeeping force, and they're ferrying these idiots with their uniforms and their weapons into voting points so that they can go vote. And these idiots are walking down the lines of voters, pointing to their party insignia, saying, "You don't vote for us, we'll come get you tonight." And that's how the Chinese faction won, because they had more of those guys.
Wow.
Yeah. So when they talk about the United Nations, that's one of the most filthy words you can put in my mouth.
Yeah.
And so this 5th Brigade was starting to massacre the Matabele tribe, which was the next major tribe. And, I can only go on what I've heard, because I'd left by the time this all really got started. But they would go into villages and they would just massacre man, woman, and child, burn it to the ground. That was it, done. And, it's never talked about.
So who's controlling that region now? Because China. Because it's no longer the country Rhodesia, correct?
It's called Zimbabwe. They don't even have their own currency. Last I checked, I have a $100 trillion bill, plus some smaller denominations, that I just cleared out of my office in California. At the time, that $100 trillion bill was worth 67 US cents. Bought 3 eggs.
$100 trillion bill?
$100 trillion bill. It was worth 67 United States cents, and I bought 3 eggs.
Wait, okay, you mean like a dollar bill, not like you owe this money bill?
No, it's a currency bill, and it's got a $100 trillion number on it.
Yeah.
And it was worth 67 cents. Now, when I left in 1982, there were 2 US dollars to one of theirs. So you want to see what inflation does? There were periods of time where inflation was so bad there, it made anything in modern history look like a picnic.
Okay, you got to explain this to me I'm not fully grasping.
Okay,
so
right.
When you say $100 trillion bill, that's like $100.
They had a banknote.
Yeah,
that said $100 trillion on it, and then they had one. I think it was 50 trillion. I think the smallest one was $1 billion.
And that's
it was legal currency
for American dollars. In reference to American dollars?
In American dollars, the $100 trillion in 2007 or 8, the $100 trillion bill, legal currency, was worth 67 cents.
Okay, got it. So it's not American dollars.
No, it was worth 67 US cents.
Yeah, whatever their currency was, though.
Yeah, that $100 trillion was amounted to 67 cents.
Yeah.
Bought 3 eggs.
Right.
They were paying people the people were joking about being trillionaires. There came a point where they dropped 4 digits before the decimal point because there was no accounting software big enough to run the numbers. They couldn't put that many digits to the left of the decimal.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and this was a very prosperous country before. Chinese came in and they plundered the place. They've plundered South Africa. They got thrown out of Mozambique and Zambia, from what I understand now. Those countries are taking their countries back. But it's too late. The damage is done. They took the precious metals. They took all the amazing forests. They chopped them all down. There's no seafood. You can't even catch fish on the Indian Ocean on those coastlines anymore, because when I was in South Africa in 2010, I was eating shrimp that was farmed in Thailand. because the natural shrimp that from that ocean that were non-existent.
That's scary stuff, man.
Yeah. 2010, I was held at gunpoint twice in that country. I watched them take trucks. People would take a truck with a winch, and they would start at one end of the street where the phone lines, telephone lines are, because they were still copper, the old phone lines. And they would climb the phone pole, attach the winch to it, and drive down the street, stripping the lines off. Roll it up, put it into the back of the truck, and there were Chinese barges sitting on the beaches taking the copper. So now there's no phones. People are dying from home invasions. There's no phones. And then I came back and I was in Jerome. This was 2010. And this is hard. There was an art gallery in Jerome that had a bowl of phone wire bracelets saying genuine Zulu bracelets. This is the phone wire that had been stripped off these phone poles.
Wow.
And they're selling for $35-$40. I went freaking berserk in that gallery, and I found the manager and told him exactly what happened. He pulled this stuff.
Oh, wow. What were you held at gunpoint for in 2010? Just money?
Let's see.
Being robbed or something?
The one time was pretty... We changed the alarm codes on my aunt's house, and the security force didn't get notified. And the alarm was defective, so when I went to disarm the alarm, it set the alarm off.
Ah, I've done that.
Yeah, and so when that happens, and my aunt was in ICU, we didn't have the foundational password. So they said, well, they've been dispatched. I said, this is how I'm dressed, and here's where I'm going to be. And these 4 guys show up, just dressed like a SWAT team, and I've got FNs in my face. Actually, it was AK-47s in my face. Private security. And these guys were all ex-military, and they shoot first, ask questions later. But I gave them a description of where it was, and they said, why, what, how? And I said, I'll show you. Gave them the code. He went, the sergeant went and tried to arm the alarm, and exactly the same thing happened to him. So, that was one harmless one. The other one, I had been to change some foreign currency, because my mother always used to like to carry thousands of US dollars for some reason, which is just stupid. And so put us all at risk. So I went to a currency exchange place, could change currency, change US currency into their currency. I'm weaving through cars, walking like this to make sure I can evade anybody that's shadowing me. Get into the shopping mall, get ready to go to the bathroom. I'm walking down this hallway to go to the bathroom. And the light from the mall behind me, all of a sudden the shade of the tunnel becomes darker, and I've got shadows being cast. And I turn around and I look, and there's 2 guys coming down side by side like this, and one of them has a gun. So I turned around and ran right at him, and was able to get through him. I turned and ran right at him. And was able to get through him. But had I gone into that bathroom...
They'd have taken all that money.
Well, it would have killed me.
Oh.
Because 2 things they do. So people used to carry fanny packs.
Yeah.
Okay, so what they would do is they'd have a knife, and they would go in by your kidneys, and they'd cut the belt off. But they also get you in the kidneys. You're not going to survive. There's going to be no witnesses. So what I was doing at the time, because I checked into stuff, I was carrying a camel pack. Hydration pack on one shoulder, so I could just drop it. That way I didn't get stuck.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And, a couple of days later at that same bank, I went to get currency. The armored car shows up to do their currency, to do the banking, take the excess notes and that. And the next thing, you got RPG-7s going into the armored car in the parking lot. This is what's going on in South Africa, and you don't hear about it. This is 2010.
You don't hear any of this.
No.
Oh, man.
And they took out the armored car, they got all the funds, and they took off. There's a gunfight in the parking lot, in the supermarket parking lot.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's crazy that we don't hear about any of that stuff here. We hear our news is garbage. It's total BS here.
Right. But this is all normal. See, people normalize this
Yeah.
by whatever rationale it is. And so you want to get back to that spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
This is what's going on, and people just accept it. They don't realize what's really going on here.
Well, I think people are disempowered. I think people don't know what to do about it. I'm just
Right.
one person. What can I do?
Well, that's intentional.
yeah, totally.
I mean, that's part
So-
of the playbook.
Well, I mean, how do you band together as a citizenry without being labeled a terrorist militia or something like
Well,
that?
if you go and protest at a
You know,
school board meeting, you're a domestic terrorist.
That's what I'm saying. So you got things like the Oath Keepers, which
Yeah.
started out great, and then now they've been labeled by the FBI as a potential terrorist organization.
Right.
But these are mostly veterans that are
Patriots.
patriots. Yeah, that's the thing. But who's the one that gets to decide when to do something radical? Thomas Jefferson says, from time to time, the tree of liberty must be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
And
So
when a tyrannical government is there, you take it out.
It's our responsibility
Exactly.
to remove a tyrannical government. But
Right.
at what point do we do that? And how do we band together as a people to prevent the continuation of this type of a terrorist government like we have right now?
So
We can't
let me
just
tell you
wait-
what the Chinese did.
We
in
can't let the
Africa.
courts sort it all out.
No, but this is
obviously.
intentional. So the Chinese in Africa, what they did is they took the tribes and they made they basically segregated the tribes. Okay, so they supported one tribe, right?
Well, that's what they're doing here in America right
Yeah,
now.
and they supported one
culturally.
tribe. And what do they do to the other ones? They take them out.
Ah,
Okay, so what's happening here? It's the same thing.
it's division.
It's division.
It's-
It's tribal.
It is.
It is now tribal.
Exactly, which is where all this gender and all this identity and
Exactly.
all
All
this
this
crap.
race and all everything
yeah,
else.
which most of that stuff, I don't think most people are actually racist or
No.
whatever sexist. All this
Look
stuff
where
that
I
they're
came
saying.
from. Right? I'm a white man born in Africa in the 60s, right? And you would think I'd be, according to history and the media, I would be the biggest racist in the world, right? Because I was white born in Africa.
That doesn't even make sense.
The main reason I'm here, besides all this other stuff, the gold and the emeralds and the ivory, is because I was defending the rights of black people against their own government, against the commissars.
yeah.
So when I went back in 1990 for the first time because they tried to take my dad out, everyone told me, "Oh no, that's nuts. That's not happening." Well, I went to the police station, the same police station we used to run the operations out of. I had my passport and $1,000 in case I needed to bribe them. Walked into the charge office, which is the booking office, which is basically the business office, kind of like the desk sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
Asked to see the member in charge, which is whoever runs that station. And he comes in and he says, "Oh, Mr. Nelson, so good to see you. How's your dad doing?" Now I'm sitting there going, "I'm on a whack list." That's why I went to the police station. Right? Because I had to leave because they were going to whack me. They ambushed all the roads for when I was coming back to the mine. Because we had gotten so heavily into the government leaders who were actually the organizers of these rings of gold theft and emerald and poaching and that.
Go figure.
Go figure. Right. Right. And the guy that we got led to, which I had no idea until 1986, 4 years later when I was in England, was the Minister of Defense. He was running it.
Yeah. Power really gets to people.
Yeah.
Man.
And so, I'm sitting, my wife thought she was going to be a widow when I went back. I said, "I got to go get my dad." "But they'll kill you." I said, "Well, no, I got to go get my dad." And so I left. She thought she was going to be a widow. And I was going to be gone for 2 weeks. I stayed for almost 3 months. And it's just interesting. So I'm sitting there with the commanding officer of the police station. I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, we're outgunned." Wait a minute. You're the cops. You were outgunned?
Yeah. Well, Mexican cartels.
Exactly.
Modern example.
But people were telling me that never happened. But here I got the commanding officer of the police station saying we were outgunned. And then he says to me, "Oh, by the way, I got your dad's guns, and you take them." I'm going, "I'm a U.S. citizen, man." Because the first thing I did when I got there is I called the United States Embassy and I said, "What plans do you have to evacuate a U.S. national
Yeah.
who's been put on a hit list?
That's an important question.
And I had to check in every 48 hours.
With the embassy?
Yep. With the spook,
Yeah.
the information officer,
Yeah.
whatever his title was at the time. And if I didn't check in, then they would go to lost known location.
Wow.
So they were set up to, you know, do what they need to do. But yeah, this is all the chaos that goes on that the Chinese create. And look at our country today.
Yeah, chaos.
Chaos.
Complete chaos.
Total chaos.
And it just goes so far overboard that people start to outwardly declare, "Oh, I'm not being this or I'm not being that," or describing. What's a good example? I don't know. I don't even have a good example. It's just things have gone to such a chaotic point to where people will offer information that shouldn't need to be offered. Like,
let's just give up all our privacy information to Facebook. There you go.
yeah,
And let them sell it.
and even the languaging. I think when the languaging starts to change around things is when we're kind of in a bad position, because I'll look on these, even like a libertarian news outlet or something that's supposed to be neutral, do whatever you want, don't harm people, that kind of a thing. It's still, they'll label things like a trans woman or a trans whatever, when that's not the languaging that I believe we should be using. We should saying a man who is pretending to be a woman. In my personal opinion, that's how we should be describing things, because I can't get pulled over by the cops or after robbing a bank or murdering somebody and say, "Oh, I identify as an innocent person," and that's not going to fly.
No,
I'm going to go to court. I'm going to get busted.
Yeah.
You know, but why does it fly in these other places and in these schools where there's stuff just changes, the curriculum just changes?
but
What?
this is what they did in Africa. They did the same thing. Now, it wasn't transgender. But the pattern was the same.
Yeah, and the chaos and the division.
And what they would do is they would abduct these children and they would indoctrinate these children, and then they'd send these children back.
Yeah.
And these families would, "Oh, my kid's back," not knowing that this kid's been indoctrinated, and now this kid's spreading it in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, China's doing that to our nation's children right now through curriculum and through
It's
college.
no different. It's the same principle.
Yes.
It's just the methodology is different.
That's right.
And they've been doing this for decades in Africa, and no one wants to realize that it's happened.
Yeah.
It's not happening, it's happened.
Yeah, and it's repeating.
And now it's repeating elsewhere. And you know, the sad part about all of this, the saddest part, I was able to get out. Irrespective of whether I was persona non grata, that means, I'm no longer a favorable citizen.
Yeah.
Right? I was able to get out. But what about the millions of black people there of the opposing tribe that couldn't get out? They don't have birth certificates. They don't have a passport. And they're subjected to this.
It's evil, man. It's evil. Well, thanks a lot, Mark, for coming on. I really appreciate it and hope we can have another conversation in the future.
Sure. Anytime.
All right, everybody. Marc Nelson. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.